Alright. Boom. This is the spark. So, I'm going to start off by saying this in this video. This moment is my last fear. This moment is the release and the act of letting go of my last fear for this persona and this slice of ego. And with this act, I am free. And to those who wish to control others, I am also dangerous. And I accept that. I accept that responsibility. Okay, so essentially we're all involved in a game of chess. That's what life is. A 4D game of chess, if you choose to see it that way. Definitely 3D at the very least, but there are a set of rules that are important to understand, but before we can even get into the rules of the game that we're all involved in, you have to have some basic information about how we think, all of us, because we all have brains, and more or less they all have the same biological components, and that's going to allow them to function with a certain amount of uniform action. All is mental. So it makes sense to talk about the physiological, then the psychological, then you can get into action. Okay. Viewing examples, the triune brain. A brain made of 3 components, 3 colors. Okay, so you might be able to see that better. Inside there's red. That's the reptilian brain. Next is blue, the limbic system. And of course the outside, the neocortex, your gray matter. That's the gray matter, that's the neocortex. These 3 systems all play important, different vital roles. Now, that red part, the brain stem, the closest part to the most inner part of the brain is the reptilian brain. That regulates your fight or flight response. It's the most autopilot of the brain functions. Now, when you look at the outside factors that influence a human, therefore influence a human brain, you're going to realize that things in our society will cater to different parts of the brain, right? Hunger, or inclement weather, or a physical threat are going to activate that reptilian brain. Interpersonal relationships, they might influence that middle part. The limbic system, right here in the middle. Your emotions. This is the control center. This middle part, the limbic system, is the control center for the emotional parts of your brain. And probably interpersonal or, various emotional triggers are going to play a factor in its release of certain hormones and the way that it's going to behave in that moment. And of course, the neocortex, the outside, which is split into two hemispheres itself, are going to be, higher thought, critical thinking, analysis, and creativity, for sure. I'm sure people have heard of, the frontal lobe being a big part of your personality, your personality traits. The way our society is set up is for largely external factors and stimuli to constantly have the reptilian brain in action. When the reptilian brain is activated and your fight or flight response is where you're functioning from, blood flow is prioritized into your survival mechanisms, hands and feet. Less priority is put on the core and on the mind. Literally, less blood flow will happen in those areas, the head and the heart. Now, you may be saying, what kind of factors in this society contribute to that type of response? And the reason you're saying that is because it's a valid question. There aren't bears running around loose, and we're not constantly outside having to read weather patterns in order to determine, especially here in Florida, whether or not we're going to make it through the next thunderstorm. In essence, those threats are actually easier to deal with because once they've been addressed, your brain can resume normal brain function. And that's one of the main tricks of our society. It's very, it's fiendish in a way. Because without those clear external factors for your brain to combat against, you're left with the state we're in. So, the reptilian brain can easily be activated by traffic. And just sitting in that environment where you don't want to be, constantly feeling more and more anxiety the longer that you're in it. And that's just one example. Exams for school, presentations at work. I'm sure that everyone has felt the pressure of a care or a guardian coming home when chores weren't done, or, in even more unfortunate cases, when an abuser is coming back into a space and feeling that need to make sure that you survive. I'll funnel it down to a personal example. For me, as a black man, mistaking a bike rack on the top of a car for police lights is easily one of the most instantaneously activating experiences that I've gone through my whole life. So in our society, there are constantly small factors that trigger emotion and make it hard for a constant state of flow. The things that I mentioned are not isolated incidents. These things happen a little bit every day. They make it harder to exist in that state of flow, of brain balance, and neocortex priority thinking. these brain imbalances, they can lead to poor decisions, and I think it's no secret that when you're stressed out, you're more likely to act on instinct and impulse. And depending on the situation, you may have, in hindsight, been able to think of a better course of action. Hindsight is 20/20 after all. So, with these factors at play, there comes a dynamic that we need to realize is also very relevant. If you can't see it, that's love, and that's fear. Might be hard for it to focus. Love and fear. Now, the reason that I drew these in connection, not as straight lines, but as two arcs that expand and then contract, is because that's how it works. The love emotional state expands all consciousness, and fear funnels and contracts it and shrinks consciousness. All other emotional states originate and end in those 2 points. Another reason why it's a good visual aid to see the space between them from love expand and then contract into fear is because all emotions in between, like I said, are results of that polarity. Kind of like the whole, there's no darkness, only the absence of light, or there's no cold, only the absence of vibration, and the decreasing of energy till you reach absolute stillness, which is, Kelvin 0. So that's a pretty good way to illustrate it, but the unfortunate part is that fear is a very real thing and causes you to act in predictable ways and very real and tangible ways that affect the way we all live. So that is one of the basic tenets of the game that we're all playing. Love versus fear, your choice. Now, love and free will go hand in hand because loving oneself is accepting of oneself and the realization that we are all one in this experience. So, if I'm to love myself and accept myself, that means that I can accept you, however and whoever you are. Love is also an element that is inextricably linked. That means that the link between love and something called free will is unbreakable. Where there is love, there can be free will. Where there is fear, there is a desire for control. Because any thinking person would want to prevent whatever they fear. So, you have love linked to free will and fear linked to control. Now, to give you a little bit more detail about love and free will, something that you'll come to understand is that loving myself and accepting myself means loving you and accepting you, recognizing my free will and your free will. Therefore, a principle that is not new, but maybe new in the conversation, is called the non-aggression principle. The non-aggression principle essentially illustrates that love and acceptance of self, others, and our unity is the avenue to exercising my free will and allowing you to exercise yours, as long as there is no aggression, non-aggression principle. The non-aggression principle also has to do with an absence of coercion involving anyone in a process or situation they don't desire to be in. Coercion comes in many forms. I can involve you in a violent situation by walking up and punching you in the face for no reason. You didn't ask for that. I have violated the non-aggression principle. If you have a piece of property, car, phone, and even though I'm not physically hurting you, I decide that I'm going to take it. Now I've linked our energies. Sure, I've gained something, but I've put you in a position where without your consent and in violation of your free will, you've lost something. And now your whole situation has been affected by my choice. I violated the non-aggression principle. You go to work every day and you earn fruits for your labor. And I decide that you need to give me some of the fruits of your labor because I say so. Through the threat of coercion. Because if you don't, I am going to, in a really minuscule way, put a microscope over your life and threaten you with prison. That's not me personally, that is the Internal Revenue Service. Because in reality, would you pay taxes if you didn't have to? And remember, state and local property taxes mostly pay for school. Income taxes at the federal level go to the national debt. Different conversation, but another illustration of coercion. Now, one of the scariest things about free will is it means that you are responsible for your entire life. You're responsible for the things you get in and decide not to get into. Free will means that you are completely responsible for your life. Each individual is responsible for the things they are a part of and responsible for the things they choose to not be a part of. But with everyone exercising that principle, everything is voluntary. And the results of, individual or group efforts are simply that. Now, true free will means that no one can tell you what to do. But it also means that no body outside of yourself, no physical body or psychological body has the right to tell you what to do, and that includes government. I shouldn't have to explain in too much detail why government is the problem and not the solution, but I'll attempt to do so with a couple of quick examples. In 2016, one candidate won the popular vote. The other candidate was put into office. Not because of the results of the vote, because when it came to individuals casting their ballots, a decision was made. However, due to a process called an electoral college, where representatives who were never even voted for were allowed to make the ultimate decision. That sounds like coercion to me. At the very least, it just sounds like BS, right? You can Google it. One candidate had X amount of votes in 2016. The other candidate had another amount of popular votes. However, because of an external system called an electoral college, we have the result we have today. Another example was when we, as millennials, were younger. In 2001, 9/11 happened, and America went to war. Not under the pretext of this is direct retaliation for what happened. We went to war under the pretext of we are searching for weapons of mass destruction to prevent further harm to this country. A couple of years later, George Bush made a joke about still looking for those weapons of mass destruction. I don't think we ever found them. I don't remember ever seeing an article like, here they are. We found them in this underground thingamathing. So, my question is, where was the reprisal? What did this country do to make it up to those who were kids at my age who experienced boots on the ground in order to protect American interests? Because if we went there for a reason, which to the best of my knowledge was not direct retaliation, according to my research and my memory, I don't remember that being the pretext, like, okay, y'all hit us, we hitting you back. The pretext was to prevent the use and the further development of the weapons of mass destruction. And if we didn't find them, then where was the I'm sorry, we invaded your country? I brought this example up to someone and they said, well, that's just not how it works. And they're right, that's not how it works. Because you don't go to war and then help truly rebuild. Now, a lot of people are going to jump to, well, we help them establish democracies. But it's clear then, and it's been clear now, that there's a section of that population that doesn't want that in the Middle East. Therefore, why do we have the right to go and do it? Or why does the same body, the government body that violates us on our taxes, have the right to go elsewhere and violate other people just because we fund them? Government is the problem, not the solution. Since this early 1600s, with the founding of the Bank of England, under, I want to say it was King James II, banks and governments have had the agreement. Central banks and governments have had the agreement that central banks can produce money and influence the economic progress because government says so. That was never something citizens actually decided on. I say all that to say is that the executive decision-making power of governments, it's just not effective in having peace on this planet. You can argue that it will work eventually, but I heard an example recently. If you have wet clothes and you want them dry, and then you take a garden hose and you continue to wet the clothes, and you tell me that eventually they're gonna get dry through that method, I have the right to not believe you, because that sounds incorrect. It is incorrect. So, very quickly, the solutions are like literally a side note. And these are just a couple of spitballed ideas. They obviously need to be developed and implemented. But hear me out. So, blockchain technology. It's a technology people are unfamiliar with, and they're more familiar with one of the products from the technology, which is Bitcoin. Let's not talk about the currency. Let's talk about the digital record-keeping system that the currency is based on. With cloud computing being a thing, the same set of information can be available to thousands of computers, millions of computers around the world. This is the blockchain. It can help establish new trust, and I simply say trust and mean new arbitration or a new ruler, as it were, by which different parties can come into an agreement and measure how well they lived up to that agreement. The blockchain can be used for smart contracts, record keeping, and even the results of votes. Now, a lot of the blockchain space is dedicated to building different markets and currencies, but certain producers like Ethereum are working on front-facing apps to use the blockchain to have this kind of access to these kind of technologies. They're mostly on the smart contracts thing. I don't think a lot of people have thought about blockchain voting yet. That's something that popped into my mind and I think is brilliant. But that takes away the need for an electoral college, and kind of takes away the need for representatives who, if you're honest with yourself at the highest levels of the federal government, don't necessarily represent anyone but themselves. Here's shining another light on why government is not the solution. The year is 2020. I'm supposed to vote for Donald Trump or Joe Biden this fall. Do you want to get slapped in the face with the left hand or the right hand? The lesser of two evils. is not a solution. It's just a less evil of two evils. Our solution as humans is to learn about our true nature and to work on our shadows. To love ourselves, therefore love and accept others, to accept their free will, and to follow a principle of non-aggression and non-coercion. Now, the good thing is that there is actually a rule book to the game that we're all playing. Now, the rule book is going to be unfamiliar to the vast majority of people out there, simply because we all went to school. And in school, they didn't teach you the rules of the three-dimensional chess, which includes personal finance, investments, how taxes really work, how to build a retirement fund. I mean, I went to school for 12 years, then an additional 4 years, and I didn't understand the markets because I didn't decide on being a marketing major. So I didn't even understand those things until I studied them. So that's the three-dimensional chess that we're all involved in. Now, because we're actually playing chess on a 4D level, there are many spiritual truths that you're not getting the answer to either. Example. Right over here, you have what is commonly known as the Star of David, but is also known as Solomon's Seal. It's composed of two triangles, one pointing up and one pointing down. The one that points up is a reference to the sun. The one that points down is a reference to the moon. The masculine and feminine coming together. Not in a biological sex way, but when you learn the fundamental principles of the rules that we're playing, you learn that there are forces that generate within and that generate without, from the inside and the outside. Now, I'm going to be expanding on these myself, however, that's why this video is called The Spark. Because you don't have to wait for me. It's all there. The information is literally a lock screen and a couple thumb swipes away. There's just so much more information about our nature and about how the fundamental laws of physical nature also help navigate the consciousness. Because like I said, everything is unified. So, the rule book to consciousness is called natural law. Its symbols and meanings should not be familiar to the average person because we all went to school, right? And as I mentioned, in school you don't even learn the rules of the 3D chess. The things that we're supposed to know. I saw a commercial the other day where this company was like, are you worried about investment? Are you worried about credit cards? Are you worried about life insurance? Are you worried about your 401k? And I just sat there and thought, if I'm worried about it, then why did I spend from 6 years old to 18 years old learning things? Like I was in school like 40 hours a week, like it was my job. And I still had to educate myself on these things. Like, that doesn't seem weird? And then of course, like I mentioned, if you didn't learn that stuff, you're not going to learn about the actual human consciousness. Because, to go back to the beginning, a part of the setup and how the game is rigged against us is to keep us here. A place where we're operating simply on survival. And most of our limbic and neocortexal releases are shaped through emotional experiences like music in movies that are directed, once again, not at consciousness, but at experiencing this reality the way that certain people want you to. You gotta study this stuff. You gotta set yourself free. Free your mind and the rest will follow. I'm gonna put a couple links in the description to help get you started. And I'm gonna keep releasing content to try to help guide people. But I think that's one of the most important things. I'm not a guru, a martyr, or a savior, and you don't need one. You need to do the work so that you can be confident in yourself and confident that you understand the rules of the game. I think that's all I have to say for now. But I will remind anyone to whom this is relevant. This is the release of my last fear. And I am free. And to those who wish to control others, I am dangerous. Peace.